presentation will be provided by Giuseppe Pignataro, and the title is The Effect of Anticipating Performance Requirement in Need-Based Grants, a Natural Experiment, and it's still a joint paper with Luca Bonaccini and Cristina Specchi.
Good morning, thank you very much for being here. So, let me just say in 15 minutes what we are doing here. This is actually a long project because it involves also l'ente di diritto allo studio for the Emilia-Romagna region, so the one that study the right to education and actually provide scholarship within the region. And we want to study actually a natural experiment, as you are going to observe by the title, where we are also looking at what happens with a reform that was applied only in this region that try to anticipate the performance requirement in a certain way that I want to discuss with you. As Carmen was saying, Luca and Cristina are with me in this project, and let's introduce the point. So we know that in particular in tertiary education, we know how many social and private benefit we can have on it. We know that how much important is for Italy, that in particular is almost always the last in terms of graduate, but also in Europe. So Europe 2030 say that people aging between 25 and 24 should be at least 45%. And in this process, all developing countries, in particular in Europe, decide to move a massive prospect of financial aid to guarantee that underprivileged students are inside this kind of mechanism. The scholarship assume usually different forms. In particular in US, there are some more academic requirements, some use exams, some other use grades or a combination of them. In Europe, usually people look at only the exams that should guarantee certain requirements. So the typical combination that I'm commenting, this is exactly the system even in Italy, we have a national law on it, is looking at people with economic needs, so people underprivileged, in particular people that are below a certain level of socio-economic status. We call this index ISE, for people who are not familiar, and in particular is around 24,000 euros per year. Plus some academic requirement, of course, to avoid, as typical in principal agent theory, some moral hazard behavior. So in some way we want to hold them accountable and responsible for prosecuting this study. So it's typically a balance between incentives on one side for performance, and on the other side the dropout risk. Why? Because on one side there's always an issue, which are the optimal requirements. This is what the literature suggests. And the typical optimal requirement would be much higher than the typical one. However, what we are realizing is that when you increase this academic requirement, then you are going to lose exactly the most poor one or the most that are in a difficult setting. So we want to see how much, in particular in this kind of story, the impact of scholarship could be unfair, what happens, and so on. So we look in particular at the story that involves the effectiveness of this financial aid, and we want to do this. That was the project we started in 2020 with this idea, trying on one side to look at something that was defined at a certain budget. In particular, we were saying, the literature say, okay, or increase the minimum academic requirement or increase the amount of scholarship received. Actually, what we are doing with this experiment is nothing about this. To make an analysis complete, we exploit, as you were saying during this session actually, administrative data from region, actually, from the scholarship of the region, so the entire Emilia-Romagna region, but we look at the performance of the individual for the University of Bologna, which are the data in which we are working for. In particular, we focus on an intensive margin, so we are just looking at people that are inside the system and making an alternative proposal that is completely different. We are not looking at the amount, so the amount is always the same during this natural experiment. We don't raise any minimum academic requirement, but we just change the timing of the scholarship distribution. I'm going to explain how let me see if it's possible to connect even this. So let me just focus on who are the scholarship briefly. Of course, there are the Article 3 and 34 of the Italian Constitution. The right of education is always applied in the same way and is connected by the region style. The eligibility criteria are always the same for Italy, and 2024, then after 50,000 for the amount of wealth and meet academic requirement are exactly the story that we have also in Emilia-Romagna. Then the public funding is divided by inside, so people that live or reside in the same city, commuting, if there are people a little bit far but not so much, and outside for those who live further away. Okay, the scholarships are more or less the same amount according to these three criteria, 2,000, 3,000 or 6,000. Actually there is a kind of incentive for people that, for women now that apply in a STEM program, but we are going to check even for this, but we are not looking right now on these results. So the idea was applied in June actually 2019 in Emilia-Romagna, and was implemented in March 2010. The additional opportunity that we gave to this individual is just to have another possibility to give exam, just an additional deadline that was earlier but not mandatory. To make everything clear, you are going to see that this table clarifies everything. How it works with scholarship. You have all students that receive 50% of the grant at the end of November or in the first week of December. In that case, you are not required as a scholarship students to provide any credit, okay? Before the reform, you should get until the August 10, according to the year of enrollment, some credits. Let's make an example. First year students, 25 credits out of 60, okay? For each year, you should have 60 credits. What we were proposing in this natural experiment is to add, you can see in red, another additional optional deadline in February 28. In this case, we require the first year students to have 9 credits out of 60, second year students 50, and so on. In particular, for the first year, you have 20% in advance of your entire scholarship, then 10% for the others, and so on. So, just the timing in which we can distribute the scholarship. That was basically the idea of this proposal. And I want to show you, in particular, I don't have so much time, but some results can be interesting. Of course, we are using the Data University from Bologna, 90,000 students, in particular 45% of students from Emilia-Romagna, some demographic area, some vertical dimension in terms of outcome, in particular exams, in particular credits. For all people who are not familiar, we have credits that compose the exams in Italy. Then we look at grades, we can even look at the probability of confirming the scholarship, and so on. So, exploiting the timing of this reform, who are the treated? Of course, the treated students are the scholarship students, and the controls are the other students. Here we have different robustness. Of course, the best control group is the one that are really similar to the scholarship students, and so we look at people, not now, we look at other students in this table, but we look at even students that do not have the scholarship, but in terms of wealth are pretty similar to the one, because we have also the social...
Can I just ask a clarification? What is the amount of students who doesn't meet the scholarship requirements? So that they
at first, in particular in the first year, the percentage is pretty high. In particular, they miss also the fail for less 45–50% in the first year.
With 25 credits?
With 25 credits, yeah. And also, there is a strong correlation, as you can imagine, between the probability of failing the scholarship and the probability of dropping out in the next year from the university.
Yeah.
So it's pretty high. And then we were realizing how much was low after a while, more or less around 20%, according to this change in the timeline. So three methodologies that we applied, because look, as can you imagine, we look at the impact of the reform as typically natural experiment, but in that case there was also some check for the COVID influence, because in March 2020 there was also the COVID. Actually, we made different robustness. I don't know if I have time to just show one table here, but the idea is that the COVID influence in the same way treated and control group, so we were pretty sure that the identification until now is pretty safe. And then we look at the distributional impact. You are going to see why this is important. So, okay, the estimation is a typical difference in difference at first in the baseline, so I don't want to spend time on this. It's pretty easy. The point of interest is exactly the scholarship and the reform that you can see in red. Let me show first the result of the simple difference, baseline, department fixed effect, and some other robustness. As you can see, there is a change actually in the first period. Just to understand, the first period is more or less close to the first semester in the way in which we are making exam in the deadline. And okay, and the second period is between March and so on until June. So first effect is you can observe that is a positive effect. Actually, we can exactly measure this effect. What we know is that there is an increase for the treated group of 1.65 credits compared to the control group that is around 1, so 0.65 more in the first semester. Then you can see, let me just show this table because it's pretty important, in particular for what we were saying before. You can see how much important is in terms of probability of scholarship. This is a probability 0.1, okay, so it's a percentage. You can see 6% more in the first semester that actually reduce for a while because the 60 credits are always the same around the year, and also the effect are much stronger even in the second year, 12% and 80%. We have different analysis. We look at some event analysis even, for instance, I don't know, I can show how much consistent is the effect in terms of credit along years. Of course, we have checking for the parallel trend. We look at 2026, actually, just to let you know, we have also data before, but the problem is that there was a different number of changes in the degree program before 2016, so it's better to make we have also a robustness for a long period, but actually the correct thing is to look at. We have also some interesting point on the event analysis. For instance, I don't know, if we look at failed, according to the failed, you can see, and we have an explanation for this. In the second semester, you are going to see that there is much failure, so people try more. The explanation is that we are going to see is pretty interesting in the sense that what we are realizing according to this reform is that people react more just to take an advanced part of the scholarship. They react more, of course, they give much more exam, they try more, and in particular in the second semester in which they are close to the deadline, the final deadline in August, they try even more and they try to change their behavior in terms of larger and shorter exam. Actually, what we are realizing, let me see if I can show you here this result, is that in particular there is a tendency of people, we are going to make an estimation even on this, to increase the number of larger exams in the second semester and to do shorter exams in the first semester. Why? Because with shorter exams, so exams that are less credit, 3, 4, 5, 6, it's actually easier to get the result and then to get the scholarship and then postpone the idea of the larger exam in the second semester, which is, of course, relatively dangerous. However, the probability of confirming the scholarship is pretty high. One point, and then I finish because I think I'm out of time, the distributional impact. So rather than looking at, for all people who are familiar with this identification, difference in difference, we can look at the changes in changes process, and we look at the entire distribution. Why? Because it can be interesting to observe even who are the people who can get some advantage on this idea. For instance, what we are observing, the changes in changes made by 2 years is there are some papers about INVALSI and so on that look at this, and we can observe that the pretty advantage in the first semester, rather than in the second semester, is that people who got less credit before, in particular in the years before, just take the most advantage. In some way, we are looking at people who struggle the most to satisfy the requirement. That is also a good benefit, and the result, of course, reduce for the entire distribution in the second semester just for the number of credits that we have. You cannot go above the threshold of 60 credits, okay? So if you give more credits and the distribution is pretty fair, however, but not so fair, so you can even advance and take more credits a little bit in the first semester, for instance 35, 40, and then postpone just 20, 25 in the second semester. That's why you can see the effect in terms of credit. Last point was on, let me just show you the grades, which is pretty interesting. Remember that this reform does not involve a total grade, okay? The requirement is just on the number of exams and of course the number of credits that you are giving, and that's why you don't see any effect in terms of grades, because one of the discussions that we have in terms of policy implementation is we should include in the merit requirement even the evaluation of the quality dimension rather than the quantity dimension. So there is a debate on the possibility to go in the horizontal dimension of the performance as we are, or we just include even the vertical dimension. Actually the results are still open, but we don't have, and we cannot apply the reform and the change in the reform according to this idea. So I'm concluding because I'm sure that I'm out of time. So the results that we have are pretty interesting. Of course, it's an experiment. It's only for the Emilia-Romagna region. For what we know, the results are even positive for the other university. We are 4 universities in the Emilia-Romagna region, but in particular for the biggest one, for Bologna, the result seems to be much more promising. We believe we should think to some changes according to the credits and so on, but at least in terms of failure, in terms of probability of failing the scholarship and the dropout, we have at least one of the results. Then maybe we should give much more incentive to understand better how to improve the credit and maybe which kind of analysis we can do for increasing even the vertical dimension on grades. Okay, thank you very much.